So I've had a look at upcycling and how to sort of promote discussion around it for particularly Gen Z. So I'm just going to talk you through that a little bit today. So I have sort of created this implement for dialogue, which I'll discuss a little bit more. But I'll just talk a little bit about myself so you can get to know me a little bit. So I'm a fashion lecturer, but prior to that, I worked in the fashion industry as a designer for over a decade. During that time, I worked for people like Alexander McQueen. I worked for French Connection, worked for a uniform company and also for suppliers. So I've got a real variety of knowledge of the fashion industry. And during that time, I became really disenfranchised by the industry as a whole because of the amount of throwaway, the amount of waste, the amount of push for constant product. And I think the sort of final straw was when I was working for a supplier and I'd been hired to create a sustainable recycled garment collection. And it became very clear very fast that this was just a marketing ploy and wasn't about the recycled garments at all. No one was checking the factories, no one was checking the claims about the fabric. And yeah, that was kind of the final straw for me that made me decide that I wanted to go into the education side of it instead. So I moved into lecturing around 3 years ago, and I lecture within FE. So I'm lecturing from 16-year-olds up to my oldest student is around 54. And I teach level 2 and level 3 fashion and textiles. And that was really me wanting to encourage sustainable practices from the fashion industry onto the future of the fashion industry. I am also currently studying my MA in fashion futures, and I'm focusing on sustainable practices. So I study that at London College of Fashion, and it's been really eye-opening and quite inspiring, and it does inspire my practice as well. I'm a specialist in design education because that is my background, and I've always had a huge interest in the accessibility of sustainable fashion. And I've been researching, I've put here 2 years, but I have actually been researching for about 3 years, and it's something that I really enjoy. I'm just quite new to it. So the concept behind me looking at Gen Z and upcycling is because of the people that I teach. So I started having a look at all this research to do with sustainability and to do with upcycling, and the comments that I was getting from my students in discussion compared to the research, secondary research that I was finding, did not line up. And it made me start to question whether the data that's created research-wise is actually more based on a specific demographic, and is socioeconomic demographic actually considered? Is there a diversity within this range of research? So I've kind of created a mind map just to initially start my research, because there are so many things that I've discussed with my students. Things that we find research-wise are saying that Gen Z are sort of the saviours of the fashion industry, and those aren't the conversations that I'm having. A lot of them have this, they're obsessed with fast fashion. So we've got two very stark contrasting views coming out of this, and I'm not able to specifically find that research that is focusing on Gen Z as a low socio-economic background group. So I didn't actually manage to find only one paper that was talking about low socioeconomic background and sustainable garments and this accessibility towards them. And the overview of the paper was quite negative and kind of said, well, actually there is sustainable product available. These people just choose not to buy it. And I think it's so much more than that. There's the psychological element behind it. People love to shop. They love to have a lot of variety. It makes a lot of people feel good. And there's also, people are aware of greenwashing, and I've started to question whether greenwashing is actually targeting people from a low socioeconomic background. So people who think they're actually doing good aren't. So As part of my practice, I've gone to see a couple of exhibitions that have a lot of sustainability involved in them. So there's the Modus exhibition, which is just started at London College of Fashion, and I started to have a look at these garments that were made from household items. So this is sort of made from kitchen items, your sponges, your pegs, your tea towels, that kind of thing. So that inspired sort of those breaking down boundaries and looking at upcycling from a different point of view. And then I've started to look at this idea of modular design. I found this really interesting, and I thought it could be a focus for upcycling, because I think especially my students that are 16, they've just come in from school, they've never seen anything like this before, so putting garments in front of them to upcycle can be quite daunting. So I thought to break this down into modular design could help them understand the process of building a garment sustainably, and also how to upcycle successfully as well. Within this, the Regenerative Fashion Hub, they also had people's reactions, measuring reactions to sustainable fabrics, which was really interesting as well, and I think would help students that I deal with to, again, understand fabrics that they're using. So I've started to actually create some workshops to try and measure creating that primary data. A lot of the students that I teach are from a low socioeconomic background, so this is where my focus comes from. And I've started to create these collaborative design sessions. So within these sessions, they were presented with a variety of garments at the front of the class, and rather than making an upcycled garment, I've said to them, right, you've got to design an upcycled garment. But this was actually collaborative, so they all moved onto every person's design and added to it. And the beauty of this was that they didn't actually know which garments the first person had selected when they were designing, and they really enjoyed it. We got some really interesting designs out of it as well. So I also posed some questions that I put onto the board just to generate that initial conversation. And these included, where do you buy your clothes? Do you buy secondhand clothes? What is your favourite outfit? How often do you buy new clothes? So they're really sort of easy questions to start answering, and they're things that people can just really just start to have a conversation, start to discuss different ideas. And it really was a 50-50 within the class. People who absolutely would not buy secondhand, but then they might wear something that was handed down from, say, their mum or from a sibling. So it's trying to get them to understand that it's a similar idea. And then there's the people that buy fast fashion because they really enjoy that and they like to be on trend. So there were really contrasting ideas. But the whole idea of this workshop was just to be really fun and to get them to start thinking about sustainability and upcycling, and they absolutely loved it. So I've started to think of how I can collect more data from different students, Gen Z age range, and from a variety and diverse group of individuals through workshops. So I've started to think of creating a series of workshops that I could go into different educational institutes and present to start to collate this data. So the first one was the collaborative design, which I prototyped and was really successful. I've also started to think of upcycling garments. So I think this would be for students who are maybe, for me, in their second year of their level 3, or at least towards the end of their first year of their level 3. And I think this would definitely be quite successful within any sort of university age range. So just getting them to bring their own garments. It's something that I've done with my second years and has been really successful. Then thinking about modular design, so either getting them to deconstruct and then reconstruct from a variety of sort of their own garments, or getting them to collect garments that would be just waste, which I will talk about a little bit later. I've also started to think about just doing upcycling design. So that came from the collaborative design workshop, where someone could just focus on designing from their own garments that they've bought in to upcycle. And then started to think of junk couture. So this came from the Modus exhibition, where you're just bringing a variety of household items that you would then upcycle into something that we put on the catwalk on my course. So this is something that we currently do, where we ask students very nicely to please collect all of your food waste or any packaging waste that you have collected for the last week. We ask them, please make sure it is clean before you bring it in. And then they start to build this, designing on the stand to create something that it doesn't have to be stitched together. It can sort of be fastened in other ways, but it's something that we can have, again, presented on a catwalk setting, so very couture. And then I've started to think about this mend workshop. So I had a student bring in a very moth-eaten jumper recently, and she started to repair this, and it was absolutely beautiful. So she'd repaired it from the inside and left all of the fraying, all of the raw edges, all of the moth-eaten sections exposed, but then sort of fixed behind it, so the body wasn't actually exposed, and it was an absolutely gorgeous item. And this was something that she said she found really therapeutic. So it was, again, thinking of that idea that it could promote discussion as well. And this isn't an extensive list of workshops. This is just initial ideas for me to think about these workshops where I could start to collect that primary data from Gen Z regarding sustainability. So what I've started to think about is, what could my theme be behind this? So how could I initially promote that discussion? So I've explored the secondary research, then moved through to prototyping through workshops. I've then just started to develop ideas for other workshops and how I can collect research from those workshops. And then I thought maybe I could actually create a piece that I could use as like a design probe that students could maybe use. They get given tasks, but are not told the origin of the garment, and see if their views change after they know what the origin of the garment is. So I decided to create this zero waste piece, which would have zero impact on the environment and on the worker. So what I think is really important to say is this isn't a piece that I have gone and bought some garments or picked some garments out of my wardrobe that are perfectly wearable. What I did was actually approach some companies that they have weighing in of garments, and then they sell them on to Ghana. And what they do is go through everything, and then there might be things that are branded or are not very good quality that they will then throw in the bin. So I contacted them and said, look, have you got anything that I could have? Because this is what my idea is. And they gave me tons of things. So I picked out a selection of these garments, and it's really important for me to say that there was to be absolutely zero waste within this. Every bit of that garment was going to go into the final piece from this. So I'll just talk you through the garments that I had. So there were some dressing gowns that were really, really old and washed and had pulled quite a lot. So we'd got an adult short dressing gown, a child's dressing gown. I think that had been washed too hot as well, because it had gone very plasticky. Then I'd got a very washed out healthcare uniform, which on the final piece, you could still see all of the folds where it had been overwashed over time. There was a school uniform where her child had definitely vomited down the front and it had become stained. I will say that I did wash all of these garments quite extensively before I used them. I had a child's onesie, and then for the filling, I've used all of the excess to then cut that up together and make sure that nothing goes to waste. So this is my implement for discussion. So this is the thing that I want to basically have within a design probe, or have within a room, and get students to sort of interact with it, approach it, capture their thoughts. So the garment has the labels on the outside as if they're branding patches. All of the zips that weren't necessary for the fastenings have been used as trims. I've put a statement on the back to sort of promote conversational thinking about sustainability as well. It's all lined in sort of the fleece from the dressing gowns, so it's actually very functional as well. And as I said, I'm wanting to use this as a design probe where I wouldn't tell them the origin of the garment, but get them to actually go out and do activities with this garment and then come back and discuss the origin once they've done those activities. And also just even having it in a room and having students come in to say the workshop and seeing it and capturing their thoughts through recording, etc., whilst they are interacting with it. I think as well, it's got to have a continued life. So it is something that I'm thinking could actually be passed on to different people to do different workshops with also. So it doesn't just, its life doesn't end here, it's got to be continued. And then I've started to think about how I could actually capture this primary data when the students are actually interacting or when they've used it as a design probe. So thought could use online questionnaires, paper-based questionnaires, audio recording of sort of when they're interacting with it, and then video recording, sort of revealing it to them as well. And then sort of having games with it where students could either create their own resource or could have it as, you're approaching this garment as, say, a designer. Okay, you're approaching this garment as a merchandiser. What are your thoughts? Encouraging discussion that way. So what I'm really wanting to do with this project is to collect primary data on sustainability and upcycling from a diverse group of Gen Z, wanting to collect their thoughts and comments. And I want to run a series of community and educational workshops to collect this data. Also wanting to reflect on the success of the workshops, and they will develop as time goes on, and then to analyse and develop data to finally into a teaching resource, and as I said, a design probe, which would then get passed on from sort of, could be from educational institute or from an individual that might want to use it for something, but it has to continue to have that life. But yeah, that is it. So